Thanks, Preben. Really good to be here. Yes, I'm going to talk to you about lead ammunition poisoning, which is a One Health issue with a seemingly simple solution, although lots of sort of barriers to actually achieve that solution. So I'll discuss some of those. I'll touch upon some of the key science of recent years from Europe, looking at the impacts of lead poisoning, particularly on wildfowl. And then I'll also talk a little bit about how we can use, or how we have been using, that science to influence policy and also public opinion. So I will skip through these first slides quite quickly because I know you're an informed audience. But I will just start by saying the obvious, and that is lead is extremely toxic. It's a non-essential and non-specific poison, and it affects virtually every physiological system, from hemostatic to nervous system, reproductive system, etc., etc. And it can have really big issues at even the lowest level. It can start affecting enzymes in your body. It's a huge problem. It's a global problem, as you probably know already, not just for wildlife, but also for humans and for domestic animals. And for that reason, it's termed a One Health issue. And as I said, there's no safe level of lead, according to the World Health Organization. So probably one of the most highly toxic substances we have, which is not great. And obviously we're using it for shooting. Very good material for shooting. Ballistic qualities are excellent. And that's why it's a favored ammunition type of choice. And there are different pathways to poisoning. You can see here from the infographic, raptors and so on are poisoned when they feed on carrion and so on that's been shot with lead. So it's secondary poisoning. So you've got your raptors, also your scavengers. Many of you will be fully aware of this as a pathway to poisoning. We also have wildfowl, really big impacts on wildfowl, and that's what's actually driven a lot of the policy changes in recent years globally. Devastating impacts, and that's direct ingestion when wildfowl are foraging in ponds or on agricultural land, for example, and they're directly consuming lead shot, mistaking it for food, or even purposefully selecting it for grit to grind down and to help digestion in their gizzards. So in the EU, around 90,000 tonnes a year are sort of sprinkled around over the countryside, which is quite shocking. We're still pumping that much toxic substance out onto our waterways and contaminating our soils as well. So I'll just touch on some of the research. Lead is one of the most well-studied issues for wildfowl there is going. The research is huge, and it's been going on for lots and lots of years. So I won't comprehensively cover everything. Just some headlines, though, that it's estimated to cause the death of 1 million wildfowl every year in Europe, and that's across 17 species. I mean, huge impacts here. We've also found that 27% of hoopers and 23% of Buick swans in the UK accounts for the deaths of them, and that's a very long-term data set WWT have been working on, where we're post-morteming birds since 1971. And also we test the blood of living wildfowl. 41% of hoopers, it's a bit higher than that actually more recently, that we're catching in the UK will have elevated levels of lead. And when I say elevated, that's when you start to see some really deadly impacts for them. So really big problem. You can see a swan on the post-mortem table. On the top right, unfortunately, we see that quite a lot. And on the left, you can just see the little lead shot in the gizzard, which is indicative of the source of lead poisoning for this particular bird. Now, we mustn't also forget the sublethal impacts. So they're not always visible. They're usually not visible, but they can be equally as damaging. Lead, as I said, impacts pretty much every physiological system, but also immunocompetence. It can greatly reduce immunocompetence, reproduction ability, and ability to find food and evade predators even. So lots and lots of issues there for birds that are performing suboptimally. We found ourselves that elevated levels of lead lowers body condition in hooper swans. So these are migratory birds that really, body condition is essential for all birds, but particularly migratory birds. They're depending on those fat reserves to migrate. And Kelly, quite a few years back now, determined that swans with elevated levels of lead were more likely to smack into power lines because lead really affects the neurological system. And there's more and more recent evidence to suggest that there may well be population impacts. This is a paper by Rhys Green and Debbie Payne, which has shown a direct correlation between ingested lead rates and population growth of a number of duck species in Europe. And this is Kevin's excellent paper that we've just heard about. You can see there when regulation came in, controlling for all other factors, you can see that there was a marked improvement in the Newth swan population in the UK. I will also just flag up, I won't be focusing on raptors today, but there's a paper by Rhys Green that came out this year, and it's worth, if you're interested, looking at. I think it covers around 22 raptor species in Europe and is shown to suppress populations. So I can send you the link if anyone's interested in looking at that. So big impacts on raptor populations as well. Of course, the Californian condor, you'll all be aware of, multiple other species as well. And of course, it is a risk to human health when we're eating a poison, when we're eating our pheasants and ducks and things that are shot with lead. We're literally eating a poison. And there's more and more evidence in more recent years of how how much risk we are at, particularly regular consumers of lead-shot game meat. This paper at the top was done a few years ago now, but it involved a number of us cooking lots of game meals and sort of grinding it down and then looking at lead levels of game meat that we were buying in supermarkets. And it was really quite shocking, really high proportions of the meat that we were looking at that was bought in sort of supermarkets and shops had levels of lead which were above the maximum lead levels used for livestock in Europe. Now, sort of strangely, in Europe, we don't have a maximum level for game meat, which is really odd, but we have a maximum lead level for food for livestock going into shops. But really quite scary. And there's been lots of health advice that's come off the back of that, issued by governments, particularly focusing on sort of vulnerable people like pregnant women and young children and so on. So there is a solution, and of course that's the use of non-lead ammunition for shooting. And it's a solution that's been around for quite a long time. And it's really great that we have some great examples where this has been widely used. And in Denmark and Netherlands, they actually made the transition to non-lead ammunition many, many years ago. In Denmark, it was the mid-1990s. And they've successfully been using non-lead shot all those years, and a non-lead rifle, a lead rifle ban is also in the pipeline in Denmark. And we can learn lots of good lessons as well from the full ban on lead ammunition in California. And I'm sure you'll have some interesting insights, some of you, on that as well. So really important that we can learn from some of these experiences, but there are still really big barriers to transition. I won't really go into those too much right now, but we've done, like I say, the collective we, several scientists have done some social science work, trying to understand hunter motivations and perspectives, and teasing out different barriers, sort of perceptions around the ballistic qualities and the non-lead alternatives not deemed to be up to scratch. But then other studies showing actually the main factor in hunter sort of shooting accuracy is actually the hunter themselves. It's not the type of shot. So big barriers. There's some sort of individual level barriers with individual hunters, although I'm pleased to say that those are starting to wane now. We've got some really good alternatives in steel, and hunters are really starting to move away from lead ammunition and becoming much happier with the non-lead alternatives, which is great. But of course, the biggest barrier is the lead ammunition industry and the gun lobbies, hugely powerful, as you can imagine, and pushing constantly for many, many years against any sort of change and transition to a more sustainable type of ammunition. So lots of vested interests involved in politics and so on. But we have made some progress, and some of you will be aware that last year, lead shot was actually banned in all EU wetlands, and that was under EU REACH, which is the main chemicals regulatory body for the EU. So a massive achievement, and it really was fantastic to see all those votes go through the European Parliament, they then get adopted by the European Council, and to see that sort of widespread ban across the EU was really tremendous. So I thought I'd spend the last bit of my talk, I suppose, just sort of it's more of a story really about how that was achieved and the different important factors involved for that happening. I think one of the main things is the science was really robust and it's been there for a while, and we had a huge wealth of science to show the impacts and the extent of the issue. And obviously science isn't everything, but it really was the foundation, I would say, for this ban to come through. As most importantly, I think collectively, everyone tried to make the science count as much as possible. So those multilateral environmental agreements, like the African Eurasian Waterbird Agreement, Convention on Migratory Species, so these sorts of UN instruments, really, really important. Various resolutions over the years. It was raised at the UN Environment Assembly as well. And I'm not expecting you to read all of this, you probably can't even see it, but this is just to show you, I suppose, the progress that's been made. It's felt like a really long haul, but actually, you know, there's lots of milestones along the way, whether it's science being produced, whether it's health guidance being issued, whether it's UN resolutions going through. And over time, it has gradually built up momentum. And I think it was just waiting for a bit of a zeitgeist moment when everything fell into place and for it to have impact and policy change. I would say one of the really important things was these sort of change coalitions that developed around this issue, particularly in the last few years. And these were small but powerful NGO coalitions. We had open letters from scientists, we had hunters from Denmark really tabling their vision and having a lot of power there in their own countries. We tried to overcome the barriers as best we could with policy briefings to MEPs, really important. Public engagement, lots of campaigns on Twitter. We really wanted to make that voice of the citizens of Europe. We really wanted to convey that voice that the citizens of Europe cared about this issue. So we had a bit of a Share the Swan campaign on the eve of a vote, an important vote that was then shared among MEPs and so on. We used the media in lots of ways, including to uncover naughty things going on as well. So it was kind of important to do that. So we found some collusion between the ministries of Environment and Agriculture in Germany and some of the ammunition manufacturers there that was then exposed by an investigative journalist. So, you know, all these things are important. There's lots of stuff going on like that all the time. Trusted advocates, we've got, you know, hunters to sort of stand up and influence, but we've also got scientists, we've got people from food retail. Really, really important to get those communicators and key messages across to policymakers. And we also had very good political intelligence from MEP parliamentary assistants, really, really important, particularly bird life. They were quite keyed into that. So, you know, there's more than 600 MEPs in the European Parliament and you can't possibly target every single one. So it was more about sort of trying to find those who were on the fence or, you know, hadn't quite decided yet, and then trying to influence them as best we could. Lots of direct lobbying of MEPs on Twitter. And really just sort of summarising to say that change was possible. And we followed a bit of a theory of change. We created urgency, we built some powerful coalitions. We had that vision for change through Denmark and the Netherlands, really, really crucial. We communicated that vision and tried to remove the barriers. And I think we just sort of got lucky at that moment when change was able to happen. So I'm going to flick through all of that really quickly because my time is up, because I want to quickly just say that there's a new restriction coming out. Kev mentioned it under EU REACH, and that's a wider ban on all lead ammunition and fishing weights. And I'd be really interested to hear if anyone wants to support that campaign. Please come and find me. It could be simply making your voice heard. You could simply be submitting your own views to public consultation. It could be sharing news on social media, bringing other people on board, etc., etc. So and any help at all, even if it's just really small. You might have a video of a lead poisoned swan. So Alicia and Daniel, you might have some good footage that we could maybe use to convey that message. And I'll just conclude by saying we do have an entirely preventable environmental pollution problem, which causes significant harm, yet we have a solution. And non-lead ammunition is available and it's effective. And this latest proposed by REACH is really, I can't emphasize enough, it's a once in a generation opportunity to completely get rid of lead ammunition and lead fishing weights in the EU. And I would just like to say that the problem now isn't in the science or the lack of evidence. There's plenty of it. The problem and the barrier is always with the politics and the economics. And we have known about lead poisoning for a long, long time. You know, Greek physicians and Roman scholars were telling us about it. And so I would just say that, like, now is we're in that point in history where we could actually do something on a big scale in Europe. So please get involved if you can. And yeah, please come and talk to me if you'd like to be involved. Thanks. Sorry for the speed of that.